Right. So yeah, it's aimed at being a bit like a pub talk. So do feel free to interrupt. That's the idea. And if that turns out to be impractical, well, we'll have to change as we go along. Um, Very much aimed at people contemplating their first few cross-country flights. If you've done a lot, most of this will be rubbish to you. You don't need to know it if you've flown lots of flights. But before you do your first few flights, there's just a lot of skills you've got to get in place. And it's really about trying to acquire those skills. So I would encourage questions. No such thing as a stupid question. If you don't ask a question, you remain stupid. If you ask it, well, you might become wiser. Um, I was going to kick off with why you might not want to fly cross country. Strangely enough, because there are a few downsides, and the biggest one is it's bloody time consuming. It takes a long time, and it's very different to just a day's flying at Woolly, where you can rely on being home at 4 o'clock or home for tea or whatever. The whole point of cross country flying to me is to have a bit of an adventure. So you set off on your day, and you really don't know when you're going to get back. If you've had a long flight, retrieve can take forever. So you've got to allow for that right from the start. What else did I say there? It's addictive. So yeah, be prepared to have part of your life taken over. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's scary, or it can be scary. It's not always, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It might make or break your relationship. Now, that can be a good thing, a bad thing. I'm not going to go there. But it can be a good thing for your relationship, because you get to travel all sorts of places, share all sorts of things. But it can also be quite a destructive thing. You see a lot of pilots for whom it does become destructive. So, it's worth being aware of. And it's not compulsory. You haven't got to fly cross country. You can have a perfectly good flying career without ever leaving the hill, so don't feel it's something you got to do. The flip side of that is why you might want to do it. And it's almost the same things. I mean, the biggest thing is it's a lot of fun. Let me see if I can find fun on there. Here we are. Terrific fun. I can press the right buttons. If you're not doing it for fun, you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. There's not a lot of glory. Nobody really notices who came fifth in the XC League or whatever. So if you're doing it to be competitive, you're likely to run into trouble. It's likely to get dangerous. Yeah, do it for fun. Do it for the hell of it, for the adventure. It's very sociable. You meet lots of new friends. It's addictive.
Just to pause you for a sec. Are you meant to be sharing a screen or?
Oh yeah, is it not showing?
No, just thinking that.
Hang on, that should be. Sorry, that's gone wrong then. Sorry, Sam. Yeah,
I can see it, Rand.
You can see it.
Yeah, there's a group of people crossing the stream. Looks like Panda.
Yeah, absolutely. Panda crossing.
I clicked on something different.
Has everybody else got screens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it. Yeah.
Oh, good. Right. That's all right. Sam doesn't matter. Yeah, have you got it?
Yeah, got it now.
Yeah. So it's addictive, as you've said. Don't take the scary bit to heart. I mean, it's usually pretty tranquil once you get used to it. It does have its moments, and we'll talk about fear shortly. The picture here, as you say, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's Panda being a hero and helping us all across a bloody river deep in the Alps on a 4-hour retrieve to the nearest road. But that's not the UK, and this is really aimed at UK cross country, not flying abroad. The aim, I guess, it's really to help you make a transition from being a local soarer to a cross country pilot, and it's quite a big step. And a lot of what I talk about might seem very obvious, and you probably think I already did do this, but actually you see people get small bits of it wrong all the time. And the funny thing with cross-country flying is it's a bit like a jigsaw. If you don't get all the pieces, it doesn't fit together. So you need to have the whole picture, and the talk's almost divided into two halves. So there's like a how to prepare and a how to do. And if you're getting bored, if I'm too slow or too fast, do shout. As I say, a lot of the stuff I'll talk about, you will know. But I bet you don't do it all the time. And the experienced guys do. They do it all the time. Obviously, there are some prerequisites to cross-country flying. Realistically, you've got to be able to thermal. Without thermaling, you're going nowhere. perhaps more importantly, you've got to thermal cooperatively. So you've got to be able to thermal in company, join a gaggle. Does everyone know how to join a gaggle? I mean, there's sort of, silly questions, but worth asking. And anyone not know how?
Me.
Follow the turning circle that other people are taking.
Exactly. Yeah. You're joining in the same direction. So you've got a guy circle. It's a bit hard to demonstrate on a 2D screen, but basically people circling one way, you join in behind a pilot circling the same way. So your aim is not to disrupt his circle. So you let him circle. He's found the thermal, you're joining it. You've got to join flying in the same direction as him, flying a similar circle to him. Come in behind him, don't cut in front of him, you won't be thanked. So being able to fly cooperatively, and there's a lot of good videos out there. Flybubble, I'm sure, will have one on joining a gaggle. Well worth a watch, because it's an important part of cross-country flying. So you've got to be able to thermal in company. Got to know enough airspace enough air law to keep out of airspace. I think I'm right, Steve, you might know better, but I think the rule is you shouldn't fly cross country unless you're either pilot rated or under guidance of someone who is pilot rated. And
yes,
of course,
that is my understanding of it as well.
Yeah, so you haven't got to be pilot rated, but you should be sort of under guidance. And I think the guidance is a relatively loose term, and that would vary according with where you are. If you're trying to fly through complicated airspace near Bristol, it's clearly very different to trying to fly from Woolacombe, where there's no airspace, and really there's no reason why anyone who can thermal shouldn't have a go from Woolacombe. So guidance is a relative term, but air law is important. You have to know enough of it for where you're flying. So down here you don't need to know much, but if you travel, you do. So the focus today isn't so much on these prerequisites, although we will come back to them. It's more about the barriers that make it difficult to fly. You do, of course, have to have the time to dedicate to flying and to traveling. And yeah, be prepared to travel. I mean, the slide I've got up there is just it's just an illustration, I guess. It's some of my flights over the last 2 or 3 years. So I don't know how well you can see it on your screens, but clearly North Devon is the biggest focus. But there are other sort of honeypot areas around. This is Milk Hill area around here. Can you see see my mouse going all right? And South Wales has got lots of good sites. Malverns up here, Longmynd. So lots of areas you go to, but travel is an important part of it. We don't get the best of conditions down here, and you've got to be prepared to move around, really, to maximize your chances of success. So what has to go right to fly cross country? Well, short answer is almost everything. One mistake and you're down on the ground, and that mistake isn't always in the flight. The mistake can be in the planning. It can be in not being in the right place on the right day. The whole thing is a sort of it's a massive jigsaw puzzle, as I said, and without getting all the bits to intermesh, if you don't get to the right place, right time, right site briefing, you're going nowhere. So you've got to get all of these bits in place, and a fair bit of what I'm going to talk about is just tricks that I've found to help you get those in place. But before we move on to those, a couple of things about barriers, because there are plenty. The biggest barrier is probably fear. Does that seem fair to those who haven't flown cross country? Is it a barrier?
Yes. Yeah.
And I've sort of broken it down into some of the possible fears that you can probably add others. So there's fear of the unknown. That one is fairly easy in the UK. I mean, the UK, you're not going to get eaten by lions when you land, unless you pick some parts of Somerset or Windsor Safari Park or something. Landing options are usually plentiful from the air. There's very few big towns, very few big forests, very few areas where you can't just pick a field and have plenty of space. So don't worry about the fear of the unknown. I think that's not a real fear. Fear of clouds, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll run through them. Fear of collapses and turbulence. Fear of getting back, or rather fear of difficulty getting back. and fear of flopping over the back. Anyone got any more to add to the list?
Definitely getting back's always been first thing that put me off.
Yep. Anyone got any other specific fears? Because we can adapt and talk about them. You know.
I think the fear of flying and not knowing where you're going to land, and I think that this season at Woolly, I'm going to maybe park down a Marine Drive and walk up a lot of times and then land back on that green over and over again, because I mean that green is a small landing pitch which could be in a much bigger field, couldn't it? You know what I mean? So I think it would just be, I think that would reduce my fear by lots of practice of landing in there.
Yeah, but I tell you, you know, really, when you're in the air, I mean, you'll see from some of the, I've got a couple of slides later, I guess, but you'll see landing options are plentiful and usually a bloody sight easier than that landing at Woolacombe, miles easier. You know, most of them you'd be really hard pressed to miss. You know, obviously there are some hazards and some whys and wherefores, and I'll talk about those. But you know, really, you shouldn't be afraid of finding yourself in unlandable territory. It's almost impossible to do in the UK. You know, flown over Swindon once or twice, and that's a bit spooky because it goes on forever, you know. But yeah, most towns, you know, towns the size of Barnstable, you're over it in 2 minutes from 4,000 feet. It's, you know, tiny little thing down there. So yeah, you certainly shouldn't be afraid of outlandings. Move on and let's find the next one. Fear of getting back. Yeah, I love this picture. You know, yeah, you shouldn't be afraid of getting back. You have to look on it as part of the adventure of the day. You know, this particular one, I'd landed in the Yorkshire Dales, miles from anywhere. Quad bike came over, and I thought, well, I'm going to get a bollocking from the farmer. Got quite the opposite. I got a couple of cold beers, lift on his quad bike 4 miles to the nearest road, stood there for 30 seconds, literally. And this guy came round the corner and he's Aston Martin, said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going where you're going." You know? Which happened to be a beer festival, which was great, you know. So, but yeah, seriously, there are lots of things you can do. Yeah, you can do tomorrow to improve your chances of getting back. Things like setting up a retrieve group or joining a retrieve group. Has anyone come across the Telegram retrieve groups? Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Anyone not?
I haven't yet.
Yeah, there's I think there's a link at the end of this to them, but you know, it's something worth discovering, how to join a Telegram retrieve group. And a really useful watch is there's a video Tim Pentreath made. You must have seen some of his videos, haven't you? And he devised a system called well, it's an XC retrieve system. So everybody uses Telegram. You fly with live tracks on your phone, something called live tracks 24, and your position pops up on a map that everybody else can see, so all the other pilots can see it. And what that means is when you land out, you can look around, you can see where everybody else is. No end of times there's half a dozen pilots scattered over the same area. You can link to their phone numbers, you can contact each other, you can maybe share a taxi to the nearest train station, or somebody's wife is coming to pick them up or whatever. But it means you know what everybody else is doing, and it's fairly straightforward to use. And I'd thoroughly recommend the looking at his video, which explains it much better than I can. So it's XC Retrieve Walkthrough, it's called. There is a link at the end. But for your early flights, I mean, I wouldn't even worry too much about that, because the likely thing is your first cross countries are going to be 10K, 20K, you know, and if you've gone to the hill with a couple of mates, it's likely that one of you has had the dud day and not gone anywhere, or gone 2K and he's back at the car and he'll pick you up. So, yeah, it's really not a difficult thing. Other things you can do, download a couple of public transport apps, you know, so there's lots of apps that tell you about the bus stations, the bus routes. Make sure your phone's charged, obviously.
I was about to say that.
Yeah. Well, it's a classic, and you know, most people I know carry a power bank and a spare, because it's just, particularly if you use your phone as an instrument, it's very easy to wind up with a flat battery, you know. And on the same vein, I actually carry a list of half a dozen numbers as well, because if you've lost your phone, you you're completely fucked. So yeah, a couple of spare numbers, and you got a few contacts, and you can borrow someone else's phone to phone, and little things like that just reduce that fear of the retrieve being an issue, and that makes all the difference. Every time you can reduce a fear, it's one barrier less. It makes it easier to go. What else do I say? Yeah, often it's a combination of walking, hitching, take a bus, use XC Retrieve, club together, share a taxi. There's a million ways, and really don't let it stop you. If you let that stand in the way, it will glue you to the hill. And it's amazing how once or twice I've forgotten my phone, and you're paralyzed. You think, shit, how am I going to get back? Anything else on retrieves? Anyone got any retrieve questions?
Where do we get one of those? I'm a paraglider. Pick me up.
You can buy them from Cross Country. They're about a tenner. Has anyone seen those? It's like a big banner you put over the back of your glider. Weighs nothing. It's just a little there, and it says paraglider pilot, lift wanted, and it sort of works quite well. Actually, it is quite good. Obviously, with COVID, things may be a little bit different, mightn't they? But I'm talking of non-COVID times here, which hopefully will be along, won't they? Fear of clouds. Anyone get scared of clouds?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how to minimise fear of them?
Don't go near them.
Well, there is that. Yeah. You can get very complicated on it, but actually you don't need to. I mean, I start by doing simple things like looking at the BBC forecast, and if there's thunderstorms forecast for the day, yeah, you're going to be pretty bloody wary, aren't you? So if it's nice clouds like the one in the top picture here, you're really not going to get issue. Those are not going to suck you in. The bottom picture actually was taken from Woolacombe, looking over the back at Woolacombe, and I thought maybe not. It's just like horrendous big cloud. Has anyone heard of the 45-degree rule? Does that mean anything to many of you?
No.
Jerry does.
I
Right,
haven't.
Barry, yeah. Basically what it is it's just if you don't have to follow it, but if you worry about clouds, if you keep an angle of 45 degrees, or what would it be, steeper than 45 degrees or down 45 degrees between you and the edge of a cloud, so you're sat, so you might be you're sat here and you've got 45 degrees there, even in 10 meter a second lift, if you fly straight to the edge, you'll clear that cloud. And 10 meter a second lift is bloody strong lift. I mean, I've never had 10 meter a second, so it's quite a useful guide to have in mind. So yeah, big cloud, obviously that may mean a long way away, and small cloud, you can be quite close, small in diameter this is now. So that's one sort of guideline a lot of people use. But actually, in most cross-country flights, you want to actually get to cloud base. I mean, the normal would be to go to cloud base. And so long as you've got clouds like these ones in the top picture, or clouds that aren't too tall, or a day that's not threatening thunderstorms, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So most people will climb right to cloud base. But I think if it's a sizable cloud, it pays to climb to get near the edge of a cloud as you're getting up to it. So as you're approaching the cloud, rather than come up, I mean, you can't see that I'm right in the middle, can you? Yeah, if you fly right to the edge as opposed to right to the middle, then you're pretty safe. I mean, as soon as you get there, you're going to be out of the lift. Whereas
how would you just sort of watch the rest of the conditions to see how? Because obviously, if you're right underneath the cloud, you can't really see how big it is. But I guess around you.
Good question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, most clouds. As the day goes by, I mean, you watch every cloud in the sky as you're climbing, and if they're all small, you've got no issue. If one or two of them are getting big, you start getting a lot more cautious, because as you say, you can't see what the one above you is doing. So that would make me start thinking about this 45-degree rule, or getting to the edge. Keeping an eye for an exit is an important one. So, the wider the cloud, the further it is to your exit. And I'd always want to be sort of edging near and thinking, oh, it's nice blue sky over there. There's not going to be any lift. I want to be over there. Thank you very much. And generally on a given day, if you're going to get cloud, well, if you're going to get strong lift near base, it will happen on every cloud. And if it's happening on every cloud, well, you don't go near them. Do you? Any thoughts on what you do if you do get stuck in a cloud?
Maintain one bearing, I guess.
Absolutely, that's it. Yeah. Speed bar by all means, big ears by all means, not in that order. Obviously, big ears first, then speed bar. But the important bit is to try and fly straight. If you haven't got an instrument or a compass, mind, that's nigh on impossible. It's bloody hard enough if you have got an instrument. But yeah, the aim is to fly straight. And there are a few clouds that you cover a lot of ground if you fly straight and you're on speed bar, you're doing what, 50 kph, something like that, 45 kph. So you soon cover 1,000 meters of cloud. Doesn't take you very long, and you soon get to the edge of it, pop out the side. So people used to teach descent techniques, spiral dives, big ears, and they are options, but you're still in the lift. You're still stuck under this cloud that's lifting you. Much better is to bugger off out of the lift. So that's the principle behind it. So take a heading, which you can see on your GPS if you've got one. Doesn't really matter which heading. I mean, ideally to where you think the nearest edge of a cloud is, and just speed bar and a big ear speed bar, keep on that heading. It is quite spooky, but in the UK, you're not going to hit a mountain, assuming you're not flying in Snowdonia anyway, in North Devon, you might hit Woolacombe if it's orographic. But yeah, in general, you're not going to hit anything. Obviously there is a hazard of hitting another pilot, so it's not desirable, move on. Fear of turbulence. Who's scared of turbulence?
Yeah.
Who's not? This is actually me, but on an SIV course, I hasten to add. So the picture tells a story. You can certainly minimize your risks of turbulence. I mean, turbulence increases with the square of wind speed. So if you're flying on windy days, expect it. If you're flying on relatively non-windy days, don't. Even on windy days, up high, the turbulence is going to be a lot less because the wind's fairly laminar. Down low, which is where you guys fly all the time, turbulence and wind much more dangerous. When you're only 40 foot above the hill, the air's not so laminar and it's dangerous. 4,000 foot up, if it's windy, it's usually smoothed out. But in general, windy days are likely to be turbulent. Very strong days are likely to be turbulent. So if it's rasp red day, do you know what I mean by a rasp red day?
A bad day, isn't it?
I will come on to that. If it's a really strong thermic day, if it's a day when the thermals are really strong, turbulence will be stronger. If it's a really high pressure day and it's been high pressure for weeks, turbulence will be stronger. But you can really minimize your chances of hitting turbulence by picking relatively light wind days. So the days when it's 8 to 12 mile an hour on a hill, something like that, you're unlikely to run into trouble, and it's really, just to put a scale on it. A couple of years ago, I think I flew 2,000 kilometers in a season, not all at once, and I didn't have a single collapse. It's really not that common on the kind of gliders you and I are flying. I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen. It does, and the odd little tip tuck and the odd little asymmetric are part of flying. But they're really not dangerous when you're high. I mean, it takes a long time to realise that. Much more dangerous when you're flying the ridge at Woolacombe or at Codden. You're close to territory. You've got something to hit. So up high, turbulence really isn't that bad. I'll talk about landing and turbulence later because that's a slightly different thing, isn't it? But whilst you're flying, fear of flopping over the back. Well, that doesn't really go away. Nothing worse than watching your bloody mate's boat over your head as you've landed 5k downwind. So that's enough on fear. Anyone got any other fears to address?
Fear of giving it a go and missing out on a good day's flying on the hill.
Well, it is a big one. Yeah, no, it's a big one. I should have thought of that. Yes, you risk bombing out 2k downwind and ruining your day, don't you? But without getting over that fear, there comes a point when you have to just think, I'm trying to go cross country today. That's my mission. My mission isn't to soar this bloody hill. The soaring a hill is just a means to an end. I've done that. I've done that 20 times. I've done that 40 times. I want to move on. I'm aiming to get a climb. I'm aiming to go with it. And you really do have to have that as a mindset. I think that's a really important.
Yes, you need to come to quite a sort of firm decision with yourself, don't you, that you want to or don't want to.
Definitely. And it's something I do sort of talk about that a bit later, but no, it's a really good point. Yeah.
And do you have a sort of an idea of, is every day different? Say you're, soaring the hill at Woolacombe, you get a climb. Do you have a figure in your mind about how high you need to get before you look to go, or not?
Not really, but it's a good question, and I talk a bit about it later on. But if I don't cover it, come back to that, because it's something I do go into a bit. I mean, in part, it depends on the weather forecast, because you'll have seen the forecast, you'll have seen what cloud base is, you see what the potential is from a weather forecast. Right, more practical things, reducing other barriers. Being with the in crowd, that makes a huge difference. If you're in with a jockey, used to have a phrase saying, if you're in with the shit kickers, you fly like a shit kicker. And I guess what he means by that is, he's not meaning to be derogatory. He's sort of saying, well, if you fly with a bunch of guys who expect to soar the ridge all day, that's what you'll do. If you set yourself up to fly with a group of guys who want to go cross country, well, that increases your chances hugely. You're in that sort of mode. You're setting yourself up to do it.
Is this picture a representation of the in crowd then?
It is the in crowd. This was at the coming back from the North South Cup this year. So this is me. I made goal, and so did all these other guys. So we've got who's that? I think that's probably Hugh Miller hiding behind there. So he's the editor of Cross Country. Guy Anderson, world record holder. Mad Eddie, who's a big Himalayan pilot. Alex Coltman, who's had the UK record half a dozen times. Mike Miller, Richard Butterworth. You know Sam, don't you? You know Butty?
Yeah, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, he's had the UK record half a dozen times. So just surrounding yourself with good guys. Obviously, rarely this good, makes a big difference. And there are sort of two ways you can tackle that. Bolt on to other established cross-country pilots, and that can be a really good tactic. Again, I'm talking about non-COVID times here, obviously. So bolt on to good cross-country pilots, or alternatively form a group of low air timers who want to go cross-country, and it means you get together, you all get to the hill. It just reduces the logistical load of sort of like transport and retrieves and all of these things, and it's just trying to get rid of problems before they dominate your day. So yeah, get in with a good crowd. If you get in with the good guys, it's easy to think, oh, I'm leeching off them. You're not. It's not at all a parasitic relationship if you go with good guys. It's a symbiotic one. So you each gain. As a generalization, you'll share a lift to the hill. The good guys will probably fly 50k. You'll probably fly 20. But you'll get back to the car first, and you'll probably pick them up. So they're gaining. You're gaining the chance to talk parabolics all the way to the hill. You're also gaining someone who almost certainly will have gone to the right hill on the right day, or at least have been pretty close to that. So it's not something where you're sponging. You're contributing as well. You're probably doing the lifts, the retrieves at the beginning, but eventually the tables turn. What did I say? Yeah, I think bolting on with others, it doubles the fun, halves the hassle, and hugely increases your chances of success. So yeah, well worth doing. One of the ways of doing that is just getting the right sort of Telegram groups and things like that. So I think I talk about that a bit later. Equipment wise, first thing I'd say is you certainly don't have to have a hot glider. Lots of people fly 100k plus flights on a B. In fact, a lot of people have flown them on an A. So hot glider is a handicap, not a benefit at this stage. So don't make the mistake of sort of trading up all the time thinking I need that. Much more important is to be confident in the glider you've got and happy with the glider you've got, so you're not afraid of the turbulence, you're not afraid of the landings, you know. That's much more important, particularly in downwind UK flying. A little bit different if you're trying to fly triangles, but you know, we're not at this stage. Almost all your flights will be downwind. Vario, obviously useful, preferably with a GPS. And anyone got any thoughts on the main use of your GPS while you're flying cross country?
To record your progress so you can review it later, presumably.
Yeah, it's one. It's not the main use in flight.
I would say airspace.
Oh,
yeah, airspace definitely.
Yeah,
ground speed.
Ground speed, yeah, that's the biggie. Ground speed for me, you know. Airspace you can sort of get by without one. I mean, again, I'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah, ground speed. And what's the importance of your ground speed? Any offers?
Upwind, downwind, crosswind flying.
Yeah. I mean, for one, it helps you decide which way is downwind, because it's not always easy to it's very easy to get disorientated. You're circling all the time. You're in an unfamiliar landscape. You know, very easy to get disorientated. And if you do, of course, one of the things you can do is do a circle. And if you know, when you point in that direction, you're doing 65 kph. When you point in that direction, you're doing 15. Well, that's downwind, isn't it? You know, so it's very useful at establishing which is downwind. How fast your ground speed is can very much dictate your tactics for the day. If you imagine a scenario where you've climbed up to cloud base and your ground speed when you're drifting, if the wind's only 5 kilometers an hour and you're circling, you're only drifting at 5 kilometers an hour. It'll take you forever to go anywhere. If on the other hand it's blowing 15, 20 kph up high, well, every time you circle, you're drifting 20 kph downwind all of the time you're circling. Okay, some of it you're doing more, some of it you're doing less, but on an average circle, your circle is drifting 20 kph. Do you follow what I mean by that? So of course, you know, all you've got to do under those circumstances is stick with lift, and you'll cover the ground very quickly when it's windy. Whereas in a light wind, sticking with lift will get you nowhere. You can still be over the same bloody field you took off with, you know. So it dictates your tactics for the day, knowing your ground speed. You don't have to have a GPS to know your ground speed, of course, because you'll know roughly from the hill. If you took off in 5 mile an hour, the airspeed, the drift is going to be slow. If you took off in 20 kph, the drift is going to be fast, you know. But it's useful to quantify it, and it's very useful at just finding that downwind track. What else have I got on equipment? Yeah, some means of assessing airspace if relevant. And I guess one of the tips is if you possibly can, make your early flights somewhere where there is no airspace. You know, it's a hassle you don't want, but you can't always do that. You know, I mean, sites we might go to from here, Dartmoor can have airspace, of course. Where else? Froster, which is up near Bristol, Ubley. Yeah, quite a lot of the relatively near places have got airspace nearby. So you need to have, you know, if it's relevant, you need to have some means of viewing airspace in the air, and more importantly, some means of understanding it. You know, you need to understand how it works. What else did I say on there? Yeah, warm clothes, warmer than you think. In spring, it's bloody freezing up there. You know, you'll freeze your pants off if you don't. You know, I mean, I often wear 2 down jackets, you know, double gloves, glove liners, and you still land shivering. You know, particularly if you haven't got a pod harness. You know, your legs get very cold. So yeah, you almost can't be too warm for your, you know, for being up high. You know, yeah. Dress with plenty. Telephone and spare power, radio, desirable. It's not essential. If you have got a radio, probably worth being on a frequency that just you and your mates are using, because you don't want to be broadcasting, you know, and pissing everybody else off. You know, so it's worth trying to find a frequency that just you use. stacking the odds in your favor. So I'm talking about now in the run up to a flight. So a few days before a flying day, you know, you're doing things like keeping an eye open for an opportunity. Get your Telegram group to do likewise. So you've got plenty of advance notice of when it might be good. That enables you to wangle time off work, off wife duties, off whatever. I think you certainly need to learn how to use RASP or something similar. And I'll talk briefly about that in a minute. What else did I say there? Yeah, using RASP. Does everyone not use it?
I don't.
No. What, Cyril? Was that Cyril?
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone else used it?
I'm starting. Just
Trying to understand it each time. Yeah.
I mean, I'll run through a RASP day later on. I've got a couple of slides where I run through a day, so I will cover that. But it's just like really useful to be able to do. As the day gets nearer, you sort of start refining all of these things. So you watch the forecast develop, and I'll come on to that in a sec. Talk to other experienced pilots who's heading where, you know. Research the possible site for your conditions. So you have things like, I don't know, if the forecast is it's going to be 8 mile an hour northwesterly, you know, do you know where you're going to head? You know, what you don't want is to be doing that stuff the night before. You want to have a good idea a little way ahead so you can plan for it, because it might be you're going to go to South Wales in a northwesterly, you know, which is obviously a much bigger undertaking than just going to Woolacombe. It needs much more logistics. Make a provisional plan. So the provisional plan might be, yeah, we're going to head to Dartmoor. Get your kit as ready as you can. And I'll look at each of those as we go along. So let me just see. What have I said? Watching the forecast develop. Worth having a few favourites, because yeah, I never like to rely on one weather site, particularly if you're looking at a forecast a few days ahead and you're trying to wangle time off work or time away from that family barbecue. You know, you want to be getting it right. So if you've got several forecasts that you look at, if they're all in agreement, you know, probably the things are going to line up. If they're not in agreement, maybe it's not the day to be risking that family barbecue or something, you know. So have a load of sites that you look at, you know. For what it's worth, these are the ones I use. So I use RASP, I use BBC Weather, I use Windy, I use Flybubble Weather, and I use the Met Office. And not necessarily in that order, but I'll look at all those. If they're all, you know, if they're all heading in the same direction, you're likely onto a winner. If they're all going different directions, you know, it may be a bit tricky. What I've got, which might be worth doing I've got a flight that I did from the Malverns a couple of years ago, and I dug out the RASP for that day. Is it worth going through that quickly with people? I mean, RASP is a major topic. It's not something you can cover totally in we've got to move that bar. Hang on, move that. Here we are. So this is RASP on a day in May 2019. I'm just going to move that screen up a little if I can. Here we go. So when I looked at that screen, I looked, it's an easterly airflow. Everyone can see that, I take it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Color coded as to strength of wind. So up on the side here. Yeah. From where we sit in North Devon, easterly wind for me, my first thought is Belston down here, but it's pretty windy. Yellow is starting to get a bit too windy to fly. Yellow represents what, 20, 22 knots, you know, so pretty breezy. You wouldn't want to be there. So looking around, next easterly site is Malverns up around this area. So what I'd have done on a day like here, there's lots of different parameters you can show on RASP. You can see my mouse, can you?
Yeah.
Wiggling away. So you can change the parameters, and what I'm looking at there is surface wind 10 meters above or 10 meters above the surface. And that's the first thing that I look at, because if it's too windy, you know, there's no point in looking in any further, is it? That's the sort of the big one you got to cover. So I look at the wind. The sweet spot is generally this sort of you know, light blue, light green color. Depends a bit on the site you're on. So the wind, Malverns are roughly here. The wind there, the forecast at, what time is this? 11 o'clock in the morning, roughly 6 to 8, maybe 10 mile an hour. 10 mile an hour is actually getting quite breezy for the Malverns, but it's sort of okay. It's in limits, and then you can flick through the day very quickly by just clicking, and it shows you what the wind. So the wind's picking up as the day goes by. This is now.
Is that just windy for the Malverns because they're big hills?
Yeah. The Malverns are very steep and spine back, so it's not a place you can afford to get blown back. It's not like Woolacombe where it's nice and flat. But yeah, looking at this, I'd have seen already that hey, it's going to get a bit breezier as if I take off from the Malverns flying west, it's going to get breezier. And over here are all the sort of Welsh mountains. And it's getting a bit uncomfortably breezy over some of these. So you're looking at 22, 24 knots. So that's more than miles an hour, of course, so you already know this is probably not going to be a really long day unless you're feeling ballsy, then I just go back in. It takes a second to go back the time. So I'd go back to time and I would look at thermal updraft velocity, which is one of the other parameters. So how strong the thermals are going to be. And that gives you an idea of what time you want to arrive at the hill, gives you an idea how the day is going to develop. So here we're at 10 o'clock in the morning. Malverns are roughly here. So not much thermal activity at 10 in the morning, but 11 is looking pretty good. Again, sweet spot is this sort of yellowy. Earlier on when I talked about a rasp red day, it's days when you got these sort of thermal, this is thermal strength it's talking about. So that's a thermal of 600 feet per minute, which is pretty bloody strong, and you don't really want that for your first few cross countries. You'd much rather have these, this sort of range. The light yellows, light greens is your sweet spot. But as I click through the day, I can see, thermals stay fairly strong all day. This sort of appearance is usually just cloud streets, so that doesn't worry me. So the next thing I would do is I'd look at cloud base, gives you an idea of how high you can climb. So let me just find cloud base. On here it's called Q cloud base, where Q potential is greater than 0. Don't ask me why it's called that, but it is, So again, 11 o'clock in the morning, cloud base around Malverns, not very high. But by 12 o'clock, it's getting to 4,000 feet and so on. So the day's looking good. It's looking sweet. So by a quick look at RASP, I've decided that's where I'm going. I would have checked on other forecasts as well. I'd have looked at Windy. I'd have looked at a few others. Does that make sense? There are lots of good videos on interpreting RASP, and again, worth a little bit of study. It's pretty easy stuff. I'm not very techno, as you probably know. If I can manage it, you guys can. The other thing I do a lot on forecasts, not related to this day, but Windy. I'm sure you've all seen Windy, haven't you? There's a great. Let me just flick back a second. Windy, when you turn it on, has everyone seen Windy?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if we looked at Woolacombe here on Windy, there's a great little feature where you can click on a spot to get the forecast. And then you can come down the bottom here, and there's a little on a taskbar, something called wind. And what it does is it shows you the wind from different weather models. So there's half a dozen different weather models that all the forecasters use. And let's move on to a different day, because that one's not a very good illustration. Move time. So here we go. This is forecast for Woolacombe on Monday the 15th coming up. And as you can see, they're all broadly speaking agreeable, and they're all broadly speaking agreeable in strength. So we got one model giving 11 knots, one giving 16 knots, one giving 9 knots. Now, on a day when the forecasts are uncertain, these might be spread in all sorts of directions. One might be easterly, one might be northerly, one might be westerly, and one might say 20 knots and one might say 8 knots. So that's not a good day to say to the missus, oh, I'm going to dip out on Sunday and go fly. Wait till they're consistent.
And do you pay for Windy? Because
no.
when I've gone on Windy, I haven't managed to bring up this information.
Haven't you? I think you have to go, you have to start by clicking on a spot, Jerry. So I'll click on a different spot over here. So let's, where have I gone? Combe Martin. And normally it's on the side here. There's I don't know if you can see my thing, but there's a load. It's set on wind. But when you click on a spot for a forecast, it pops up with this other little box at the bottom. And there's a meteogram, which shows like a meteogram shows the weather and rain and stuff. But there's also one called wind, which is that's what I look at it for, is the wind. But yeah, have a play. I can show you another time. That's so yeah, I guess the message is look at lots of different forecasts. If they're all in agreement, you know, it's likely to be a winner. If they're all over the shop, don't burn your boats yet, you know. What have we got next? Let me just move on. Yeah, we've talked about this before, and we talked to experienced pilots. They'll all have debated the forecast. Sorry, I've got to change back my screen, haven't I?
I've definitely just a lot of the time just ask people where they're going and follow them if
yeah, and that's a good tactic, you know, and it works. But it's good to learn to make your own mind up as well, you know. So you know, and what tends to happen is with Telegram groups, yes, everyone can learn and contribute, but do it personally as well. There is a sort of collective knowledge, a gaggle knowledge, if you like, you know, a herd wisdom as to where to go. It's not always the right place to go for a low airtime in mind. I think just be slightly wary, because, like, yeah, the keen guys that contribute on Telegram probably are aiming to fly 150, 200k. They probably want quite a wind. They probably want really strong thermals. So just be aware that that may not be you. You know, it may be, depends where it is, but it may not be. So yeah, talk to experienced pilots either personally or through Telegram. Use the group wisdom. Research possible sites, you know, and you can do that ahead of schedule. So that might involve things like looking at site guides, looking at site roses. It might involve joining another club. It's worth having in mind roughly what sites you would go to for what direction. So if you said to me it's going to be southwesterly, I would straight away say, well, Milk Hill's probably your first port of call, followed by Magic Mountain in South Wales, you know, and I sort of know that, but you probably don't. You know, you can always ask, but it's worth getting a few of those things in mind and look a few days ahead, so you're narrowing down the possibilities. If you're thinking of going to South Wales, you know, it clearly has a lot more logistic implications and time implications than if you're flying at Woolacombe, doesn't it? So you need to plan it. You know, you need to have stuff ready. You need to have organized transport, etc., etc. So use Telegram groups, use experienced pilots, and consider joining clubs. Places like the Malverns, you haven't actually got to be a club member, but you do have to have applied for a sticker. You have to pay a one-off, I think it's a £5 fee. You get a helmet sticker, and you sign to say you've read the site briefing, because they have a sensitive landing. So yeah, and you don't want to be doing that on the morning. You need to do that ahead. So yeah, an awful lot of this is about planning ahead and just, you know, getting rid of barriers, getting rid of things that stop you getting to the right place, right time, and flying. Let me move on a bit, because you want to hear about flying, not all the planning. Everyone's seen this. It used to be XC Planner. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yep. It used to be called XC Planner. It's now called flyxc.app. Again, there's a link at the end of the thing. And what it's great for is showing you the hotspots. So what this is showing is, well, it's a map of the UK. Milk Hill is here. These are all tracks that have been taken from the XC League. So you can see loads of people fly there, lots. You know, North Devon, Barnes. I tell you what, I've got a live one here. Let me bring that live one up. That's probably better. Yeah, when you log on to it, it looks like this. Zoom out a little if I can. Sorry, zoom out. So you log on, it looks like that. There's a little menu you can press. You can bring up, they call it Airways on here. So it's really useful at seeing where all the flights are done. So you can see Milk Hill area, you can see Gloucester area, that's Froston, Selsley, Leckhampton, South Wales, and it gives you ideas of where you might go. You can see this is broadly southwesterly, can't you? The other thing it's great for is airspace. What do you all use for airspace? Have you got a physical air map, Jerry, or have you?
Me, yes, I've got both scales and Fly Sky High on my phone. Of course, I haven't used any of them yet, and no. I'm still learning them.
Yeah. Well, what this is really good for, if you were going to go to, let's say we were going to go up to Milk Hill, which is this sort of an area, you're going to want to know roughly what sort of airspace is downwind of you, aren't you? So you can bring up, again, there's a little menu bar. You can bring up airspaces, and that should. It says me. Is it going to bring it up? There you go. So I've got this set to airspace. If you put, you can change the floor of airspaces. If you put all the airspaces on, if I change this to airspaces 6,000 meters, it's bloody full of them, and you think, shit, God, can't possibly fly there. Most of those are at 20,000 feet. They're not of any issue to you. So you can change the height of these, and generally, if I'm looking, I'll look at 4,500 feet. On a good day, you might have to up that. You might have to up it to 6,000 feet. So you can look here, and flying from Milk Hill, you can instantly see Milk Hill is around here. Flying in the southwesterly, your big issue is going to be here, which I think is Brize Norton. Brize Norton, sea ground to 3,500 feet. So it enables you to put in a bit of planning. But more importantly than that, what you can do is you can measure, I'm not going to do it now because it's a bit of a fag, but you can find the takeoff, which is easy to do. Easiest way of finding the takeoff is put the airways back on. So you can measure here to here, and it's about 40k, something like that, 50k. And for your first 50k, you've got no airspace issues, so it's really useful at doing that, and particularly in your early flights, that's just such a useful thing to be able to do, to be able to say, I've got no airspace issues till I've crossed Swindon, till I've crossed the M5 here, and I don't know, you've got a characteristic shaped road junction, that's or a motorway junction that's near the airspace. Then you've got to start looking. So it frees your mind. It gets rid of that problem. It means you can focus on just the flying. So it's a really useful app. You can do all that on your phone, but it's just easier to do it on your desktop before you go. It gives you some idea. And again, it's about just getting as much done ahead of time as you possibly can. So yeah, you're going to make a provisional. Got to change my screen. Sorry. Make a provisional plan. So Telegram groups and similar. And what most experienced pilots do, if I'm planning on a cross-country day, I'll post on the club group, say, anyone interested in cross-country on Thursday, and you get a few takers who might be interested, and then form a separate group, because otherwise it's a pain in the butt to the rest of the club. The rest of the club aren't interested in, are you going to meet at Tesco's at 7 a.m. or whatever, so form a separate group. Preferably only one group, because what sometimes happens is you wind up with 5 groups for the day. Everyone's joined a different bloody one, and then when it comes to organising retrieves and logistics, you got to post the damn thing 5 times. So, just form a WhatsApp group for the day and bin it at the end. And with that group, you can do all sorts of things. You can find how you're interested. You can organize travel share. You can organize where you're going to meet. You can organize who's bringing the sandwiches or the tea, et cetera, et cetera. Check that everyone's got the same sort of time available. And probably you should all check your own airspace and NOTAMs, but sometimes just one guy will check the airspace and NOTAMs. Anyone know where to get NOTAMs? Anyone not?
Got
not.
Easiest place is Flybubble Weather. There's a little link on Flybubble Weather to NOTAMs, and note that if you do it that way, they're very filtered. So there'll be NOTAMs about all sorts of things. There'll be somebody flying a balloon at 300 feet to advertise, blimp tires or something. You're not interested in that. So the Flybubble Weather site will filter them and really just give you relevant stuff for the day. But sorry.
When you submit a CAN-P, you can see, it'll tell you if somebody's already submitted one. So
yes, it will do. Yes, yeah.
For that as well, you can see.
Yeah. But on flyable weather is quite good. I mean, if we got time, I can look back at that later. But yeah, we need to move on to things that'll excite you more than all the preparation. Get your kit ready. Yeah, and I mean like ready. So yeah, as the day approaches, I will have checked all my batteries are charged. I'll have all my clothes in there. I'll probably even have my sandwiches and my drink in there, because flying from North Devon, quite often if you're going to South Wales or Milk Hill, we'll leave at 7 in the morning. So you don't want to be doing this stuff then. You want it ready. A lot of people have a checklist. Depends on how you are, but just really make sure you've actually got it ready and got everything ready, everything fully charged, power bank, all that sort of stuff. Food and drink, credit cards, maps, etc. Where to go? Yeah. Again, we've talked about that largely, but yeah, wind's got to be in the right direction. It's got to be within your range of travel for the day. So a really good day, I would consider going to Longmynd, which is up in Shropshire. It's a bloody 4-hour drive. I'm not going to do that for a 20k flight. I might do it if it looks like I might be able to fly 100. So yeah, again, it's this business of having a few sites in mind, having a like-minded group who all want to go to the same place. You haven't got to make a final decision. We often actually do that as we're traveling. I mean, if I'm flying with Rich and Stu and co, often it will be in that area around Gloucester, for example, and you'll finalize your site choice on the way up there, but you've sort of set out your area, roughly where you're going. Needs to be somewhere that's reasonably thermic on RASP. Yeah. As we've touched on, not necessarily where RASP will be best. The snag with the best RASP day is the best RASP site is it's likely to be bloody busy, and that doesn't matter too much if it's somewhere like Mere, which is quite big, or Magic Mountain in South Wales, it's big. But if you're somewhere like Froster, which is pretty small, it's quite a bloody feeding frenzy when you get 60 cross-country hungry pilots all converging on the same thermal. You really don't want to be doing that for your first few. You want a bit of peace and quiet, don't you? A bit of company, but a bit of peace and quiet. On that note, I guess one of the things to say is, if you do get a day like that, generally the hot guys will get off early and bugger off, and it can quieten down. So, it doesn't necessarily put you right off, but just be aware that, at one stage it's likely to be bloody busy. Airspace and NOTAMs, yeah, we've touched on them. One of the big things with airspace is, as I said before, if you're going to be involved with it, have a plan. And that plan might be as simple as, well, I can fly 40k without having to worry about it. I can fly till I'm across the M5 without having to worry about it. But with airspace, it definitely pays to think ahead. I mean, as you get better in your cross-country career, it becomes much more of an issue. But, if you imagine a circle of airspace and you're approaching it, if you don't decide what to do till you're there, it's very difficult. This looks like a rude diagram, doesn't it? Yeah, if you decide there, you've only got to change course a little bit and you'll miss it. If you decide there, you've got to make a radical change in course. So think ahead, have a vague idea about the airspace.
And sorry,
yeah.
the NOTAMs are, they're just for your takeoff site, right? Mm-hmm. You can't NOTAM.
No. We sorry, I should have made that clear. Yeah, my mistake. No, NOTAMs will be, so there will be lots of other NOTAMs around that might be things like the Red Arrows are giving a demonstration in this circle. Yeah, in this
we're looking
area.
at NOTAMs rather than requesting them.
Yeah, so looking at them, yes, yeah. And often they have a time frame, so it may be that the Red Arrows will be there for between 2 and 4 p.m. on the 5th of March or something, and you're not allowed into it, so you need to have some means of identifying that and knowing that, again, down here it's not too big an issue, but it is an important part of the process, and you should certainly do it. So on the way to the hill, lift share, not only is it greener, but you get to talk parabolics all the way. You talk about the weather, the site and the hazards, downwind routes, and you can clarify your sort of retrieve plans, etc. So to the bit that's more interesting, the hill. We got there. Anyone know where that one is? No,
Sure.
Clough Head in the Lake District. Beautiful site. Lovely. Yeah. So with the hill, first thing I would say is get there on time. And by on time, I mean early. So that day we had at the Malverns, you know, we were looking at aiming to take off 12. I think we were on the hill by 10. You know, because it takes time to set your kit up, be ready. The weather forecast might be an hour out. You want to be actually ready when you want to go. You know, so get there in plenty of time. Have a site brief, and if there's not one of your group who, you know, your mates who know the site, just ask someone, and people are very happy to give a site brief. You know, I mean, in the Lake District, it's not so relevant. You can land in loads of places, but in lots of the other sites, they have landing fields or fields you're not allowed to land in or meant to avoid. And, you know, a lot of that you will probably have got from reading the site guide, but there's nothing quite like a site brief from a guy on site who will say, no, it's that field there, the one with the donkey in, you know. So, yeah, get a site brief. Don't be afraid to ask someone. People are very happy to give a site brief, but it's one reason to be there in plenty of time. What do I say next? Yeah, get your kit out and get it ready. I mean, that's pretty much the first thing I do when I get to a hill. And by ready, I mean actually ready. So all I got to do is step in the harness, take off. So, you know, my instruments are turned on, my sandwiches are tucked away, your glider's out, ready to whatever your inflation technique is. Because there's nothing worse on a light wind day than like, yeah, you've been busy gossiping and the one and only thermal of the day comes through and you're not ready, you know. So yeah, have it actually physically ready, you know. Site briefing again, I forgot to mention. Yeah, it's probably worth talking about thinking about side landings and talking about side landings and side landing options. Some sites are good at it, some are difficult, you know, so it's worth clarifying. If everyone's up and in the air, get up in the air, you know, or you can do your socializing. Yeah, watch the weather develop. Watch other pilots, especially the good guys. So if you've already identified, you know, if Rich is there, watch him like a hawk. If he's getting ready to launch, he's probably right. You know, be ready. Move on. Yeah, by ready to launch, I mean, where have I gone?
Go for a wee.
Yeah, absolutely. Empty your bladder, dress warm. If it's soarable, get in the air. No point in waiting. You know, it's much easier if you're in the air than trying to launch just as that horrible gusty thermal comes through. So, you know, particularly if there's good side landings. Sam, you should recognise that, mate. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was Sam's first cross-country flight in the Lake District. Absolutely fabulous. So we flew down, past here and past the next set of mountains and all the way back, landed by the van. Brilliant. Yeah. But yeah, if it's soarable, get in the air. If you know, if others are staying up, no reason why you can't stay up. If it goes light, any thoughts what to do if it's going light?
Land.
Well, yeah, if you have to, you know, but often the reason it's going light is because actually the wind is being blocked by a thermal that's approaching. So, you know, if you can, stay in the air when it goes light, but don't stay in the air at all costs because, you know, the last thing you want is to be down at the bottom just as that thermal comes through. There's a balance to be struck there, you know, but, you know, light wind usually means it's about to get good. But, you know, it's one you've got to take with a pinch of salt. Depends on the site you're on, you know. If you see other pilots climbing, go to them because that's where the lift is. But remember your airmanship. Remember that business about joining well, and worth looking at a couple of videos on Barry. It's definitely because there is quite an art to joining a set of pilots, and people do sometimes get. Usually they're very welcome. People will usually let you in, you know. But yeah, there's nothing guaranteed to piss someone off more than them having to alter their course and lose the thermal. And, fuck you.
I was about to say that it's that's one thing that I think a lot of the good guys notice do when they're on the hill before you take off is you're feeling those sort of gaps in the wind.
Yes, definitely.
And then waiting for a thermal to come through, and you sort of get a bit of a feel for the day. Yeah. Like, oh, there's a 5-minute cycle between each thermal coming through, and there's a minute or 30 seconds of sort of like the wind drops before the thermal, and then you can feel it hit. And
Yes.
that's
Yes.
something
Yeah,
that's
so
helpful to do.
you get a feel for the rhythm, don't you? You know, and things like watching a cloud approach. If there's a lovely juicy cumulus cloud approaching, well, probably there's going to be a lovely thermal underneath it. So, you know, be ready. Preferably be ready in the air if it's soarable. But if it's not soarable, then, you know, the last thing you want to do is take off, be at the bottom as it comes through. So again, there's a balance to be struck there, isn't there? You know. Sorry, lost my place. If it's not soarable, look at this poser, Sam Jays. So if it's not soarable, I mean, this is where you should be. You should be, you know, if you're expecting thermals to come through, you should be in your bloody harness, instruments turned on, gloves on, also gliders laid out, ready to alpine launch if he needs to. All Sam's got to do there, stand up, run, you know. And on the light wind days, yeah, it's amazing how many of them only have 1 or 2 thermals, you know. And if you're not ready, you know, if you're busy having your butty, if you're socializing with someone, you can't get in your harness quick enough. So, you know, you need to be ready. Any thoughts on what you'd look for while Sam sat there in his harness? What are you looking for?
Birds.
Yeah, birds, definitely. Yeah.
If it does go light, you can often sort of watch the trees out the front or the bushes, and then you can see a thermal like coming up a hill.
Yep. Or you can see it in the crops in front often. Codden's quite good for that. You can see it in the crops in front. Windsocks, if there's windsocks. Other pilots, if you see Rich getting ready, get ready, because he's a master at that. He's very good.
Do you take off literally into the thermal, or do you try and time it sort of like a minute before so you're clear of the hill? And
depends on the hill very much, Jerry. Yeah, it's a good question. Rich is bloody good at it. He'll usually take off before the thermal, you know, and he's just great at, you know, spotting something or smelling something. Sometimes you can smell them, you know, or the air gets warmer or the wind changes direction a little. But it's a brave tactic taking off before it, you know. But equally, the worst thing is to take off at the end of it. So the worst thing is to wait for it to get windy, and then it's too windy for you to launch, too windy for you to launch, and then just as the thermal finishes, you know, oh, the wind's died down a bit, you put your glider up and take off, and then you got all the shit air behind it, you know. So that's the worst thing. So yeah, generally, you know, if you think there's a thermal coming through, you'll want to be in it early, you know, preferably in the air beforehand, but of course you can't do that on these light wind days, you know. And your tactics depend a bit on the site. I mean, this was actually Cornborough, so there's not really any bottom landing, you know, so you can't afford to sort of get it wrong there, you know. Other sites are easier. Let's move on. So on a halfway decent day, you'd take off, you'd be in the air, you're soaring. Any thoughts on tactics?
Get a good thermal, fly miles.
That's not a bad tactic. Yeah, so I mean, I think you might have seen this, Cyril. This was from that video. So
yeah, I recognise it.
Yeah, that's Codden. And you can see my flight. I'm not quite sure what happened at the beginning here, but anyway, I've been walled around, got a little bit of height, pushed out the front. And the great thing about being out the front, so I'm now sort of half a K in front of Codden, something like that, is any climb you take is taking you back towards the hill, which is great. If there's anyone climbing here, I can see them and I can fly downwind and get to them really quickly. And if I get a climb, you know, by the time I'm sort of back over the top of Codden and starting to get committed, I'm much higher than I was after the first thermal down here. Yeah, I'm much higher. So it's a really good tactic if you can, to push out the front, but you have to use it with caution, because like if you get out the front and the wind dies, you really want to be able to get back inside land. You know, it's a bugger if you get down the bottom field. So it's a fine art, you know.
That's quite a good thing to practice, isn't it?
Definitely.
How far you can push out before getting back to the hill.
And you can practice that well at Woolacombe. Actually, is really good for that, because you can. It doesn't even need to be thermic. You can practice and you climb and you climb and you push out and think, can I get back to the hill all right? You know, and you got back easily, you know, halfway up the hill. That was easy, you know. So next time go a bit further and you get a feel for how far you can get back, you know, and be safe in the sort of ridge soaring mode, you know. But it's a really useful trick. Because again, if you haven't flown cross country, this probably isn't obvious, but if I'd taken off, you can see my mouse all right, can you? If I'd taken off here and just gone with the first thermal, you know, it might have drifted like this. And if the thermal died, I'm here, I've got to fly all the way back there into wind, without much height, and it's very easy to get committed earlier than you want to. If you take a thermal straight from the hill, if you take a weak thermal straight from the hill, you drift back a long way, you don't climb very far, end of day. So a bit like, I think, was it you saying earlier on, Barry, one of the worries is you go with something early, and you
miss out on the day.
End of day.
Yeah.
One of the ways of avoiding that is to you climb a little bit, push out the front, climb a little bit, push out the front. So this sort of step ladder approach, and it means by the time anytime I'm out here, it's easy to get back to the hill. I'm flying downwind, you travel fast, you cover territory. Anytime you're down here, it's really hard to get back to the hill. So it makes sense to try this sort of stepwise approach. Sometimes you take off straight into a cracking thermal, you go straight up there. Well, there's no point in the stepwise approach, but it's a useful trick. So on a halfway decent day, be in the air, try and push out the front if you've got spare height. Here we are. Do I stay or do I go? That's the question you were asking, wasn't it? When do you commit? Have to say, for me, it's like it's the magic bit of a cross country day. That commitment, that sort of, yes, I want to go with this one. Any thoughts on what makes you decide it's the one?
Height.
Yeah, we'll come into it, but it's not the be all and end all, but definitely comes into it. Yeah.
I would say a consistent, strong climb that you're always in.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, for me, the most important bit is how consistent that climb is. If I've been able to do 4 consecutive 360s in it, there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't do 24 consecutive 360s in it. If each of the first 4 have been half in, half out, then you're struggling to center that one, aren't you? So the most important bit for me is, can I center it well? Am I constantly in lift in these circles? If I'm constantly in lift, you sort of get the confidence that you can stay constantly in lift and you can go with it. So, I've left the hill with 50 feet before now, and got away with it. Is much more comfortable if you can leave at 500 mind or 1,000, but it hasn't got to be high. Much more important is consistent.
Having a partner as well is pretty
definitely
reassuring.
Yeah. If you've got if you've got a gaggle of you, much easier to stay in the lift because you've got all these markers, and if you fall out, they're still in it. You know where it is. Other things I would think about: how many climbs have been coming through. If there's a climb coming through every 10 minutes and this one's a bit scrappy, well, maybe I can wait. If there's only been 2 climbs come through in the last 3 hours, beggars can't be choosers. So that comes into it. What does the sky look like? Is it peppered with lovely clouds or is it blue? Is the day improving? Is it getting worse? Round here in particular, is there going to be a sea breeze? So for Codden, that's a really big factor, because usually at Codden, by the time it's, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, sea breeze is starting to come in and the day finishes. So, if it's 12 o'clock, I'll probably take a climb. What else have I got? Yeah, it's the magic moment. And the worst thing is to shilly-shally, to half take a climb, then push back to the hill, and half take a climb and push back to the hill. You never get anywhere doing that. There comes a point when you got to flip the fucking switch and just go, and that's just great fun. So you are the one. If there's a lot of climbs coming through, you can be pickier, as we've just said. Am I well centered? So 4 or 5 consecutive 360s, all staying in the lift. Am I in a good gaggle? Not all gaggles are good gaggles, but if you're in a gaggle with a couple of good guys, that doubles your chances. Is it a good climb by the standards of the day? Well, sometimes you get to choose that, sometimes you don't. How windy is it? The reason I mention that is on a windy day, if you haven't been able to push out the front, often 4 turns and you're committed, and if you recognize you're committed, no point in trying to push back to the hill. If you're not going to make it back to the hill, you might as well bloody go with what you've got and try it, but it needs to be a wholehearted go with what you've got. If you're shilly and shallying, and you get the worst of both worlds, you just drop out of it. You won't stay in the climb, you won't get back to the hill. Can I get back to the hill even if I want to? Yes. So we talked about that. How to thermal. Ooh, it's the bit everyone wants to hear, isn't it? Lots of good videos. I mean, it's a bit of a dark art, and in spite of all you read, I think it remains an art. I'm not sure that, well, I'm not sure I've ever twigged the science to it, you know. But when you're practicing, it's certainly worth trying to stay centered as long as you can. And you can practice that at Woolly. And I'll come back to thermals in a second, because I've got more on that, I think. So it's not really the main subject of the talk, but it's, you know, it's certainly something worth talking about. And at a simple level, if your machine goes beep, you wait 4 seconds and pull a string, you know. So in one level, thermaling is dead easy, you know. There's lots of good videos with clever graphics. Flybubble have got some excellent ones. Practice every time you get the chance. If you can thermal at Woolly, it's easy to thermal in most places. Woolly thermals are weak and watery, you know. I think one of my main thermaling tips would be, if you lose a climb, in the absence of any other clues, it's nearly always upwind of you. You've nearly always fallen out the downwind. So, you know, if you've lost a climb and you're lost, you haven't a clue where it is, go back upwind, and I bet you it's there. You know, that saved my butt on so many occasions. Thermals, I mean, I like to look at it really as thermal principles. So I've got a few principles here to think about. Dripping oil model, everyone familiar with that? Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Never heard of that one.
Yeah. If you imagine a Arctic ceiling, or something like an Arctic ceiling coated in oil, where's it going to drip off? It drips off all the spikes, all the pointy bits, doesn't it? All the anywhere where there's a disruption in the surface, you know. And thermals are exactly the same, because thermals, they're sticky things. They have inertia, they have a mass. The mass is hundreds of thousands of tons, believe it or not. They're huge things. They're bloody heavy. You know, amazing they go up in the air, but they're heavy. So they take a while to move. They take a while to lift off. They're sticky, and they lift off where there's like a discontinuity. So if you've got a slope with a kink in it, you know, like this, thermals are going to lift off where the kinks are. They're not going to lift off on the smooth bits. They'll lift off on all the kinks. So if you've got a hillside with lots of kinks, lots of ridges, tree lines, that's where thermals are going to lift from. So worth bearing that principle in mind, not just on the hill, but in your whole cross-country flight. That sort of principles of where thermals come from. So they drip off pointy bits, you know, because hot air won't go downhill. It'll only go up from a pointy bit, won't it? They have inertia, so it takes a while for them to build up. They're sticky. They need something to release them. That something might be pretty much any sort of change in the landscape. So as you're flying along, the discontinuity might be a line of hedges. It might be a line of trees. It might be a river, a road, something. If you imagine a pool of hot air and it's gently drifting along the ground, something to disrupt it, something to make it trigger. Handkerchief model, does that mean anything to you? Again, it's a really useful concept when you're in the air. I'm not talking now about your first thermal. I'm talking about as you're flying along. So handkerchief model, if you imagine I won't get my hanky out. This is a cleaner. If I put that on my hand and lift it up, you can see that the edges all get drawn into it, can't you? Do you see what I mean by that? So it starts as like a square, and as I pull it in, the edges all get nearer. And thermals do exactly that. So if you give them a chance when you're flying along, thermals actually will suck you in. Yeah, all the air around is being entrained into this thermal. So if you feel your glider drifting, if you feel your glider being pulled, go with it. And almost invariably, it leads to a thermal. So it's a really useful concept to have in your head when you're looking for your second thermal. If the air's getting drawn this way, go with it. Always worth trying to connect in your brain a thermal source to a cloud. So if you see a cloud up here, thermal source down there, you're going to want to be somewhere in a line between them, aren't you, to intercept this thermal? Does that make sense? Yeah. So every time you get a thermal, I look up at the cloud, think, oh, it's coming from that cloud. I also look down upwind and say, oh, it's coming from that field. So it gets your brain into that sort of gear and helps you to learn about thermal sources and so on.
I can't see where to do it. If I click on there, it'll record it, presumably, will it? I want to say cheerio. I can't see where to.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
eyes are
you just
killing me.
press end, Cyril. There'll be an end.
Yeah.
Let Cyril.
Can I record it? Yeah. Don't mess anything up.
I'll carry on. Sunshine. Sunshine's your fuel, so you want to be where it's sunny, not where it's cloudy.
I'll wait till it stops talking.
5-star model. Does that mean anything to you?
What, from RASP?
No. This is Bob Jury, or a lot of pilots talk about it, but basically you give things a star that make a thermal more likely. So a sunny field, it will get a star. Somewhere where there's a cloud above it will get a star. Somewhere where the wind is drifting thermal onto a trigger will get a star. Another glider going up will get a star. So yeah, these are just concepts to have in your mind. And I say there are loads of good videos on finding thermals, and I think much better to look at those and try and
Hey,
talk
Chris.
about them in a talk.
I said hi, Cyril. Do you have?
You all right, Cyril? So here we go. There we are. We've lost Cyril. Where to find your next climb? So can you see? You can see the slide here, all right? Can you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyone any thoughts on where your next climb? Well, what would you do? That's my. You can see my my feet. I'm heading this way. Yeah. Have a quick scan around the picture, and I'll go through my thought processes.
Well, I didn't go anywhere near it.
So what we've got here, I mean, we've got lots of sun down below me here, which is great. So, and these are lovely brown fields. They're all likely to be good thermal sources. Ahead of me mind, I've got a big area of cloud shadow. See this, which is all going to be shaded. And this lot probably, well, there's sort of two opposing factors going on. It's underneath the clouds. So that's where I want to head, because clouds are where the lift is likely to be.
Famous.
But of course, if I get too deep into these cloud shadows, the ground's going to cool off. There won't be thermal. So you've almost got two competing things going on there. Up high, though, clouds is what you take notice of. So I would head for my nearest cloud. This one here is where I went. But other factors I'll be taking into consideration. There's like a sunny line going through, So if I wasn't finding lift, I'd be heading for the sunshine, So again, there's lots of Greg Hamilton's done some great videos, and worth looking at those. But generally, I'm looking for clouds, particularly when I'm up high. Lower you get, the more you look at ground sources. So anywhere you imagine might be hot, so brown fields, light fields, towns, car parks, solar farms. But remember, of course, the thermal is going to be downwind of that source. So you've got source as in the fields here that are sunny, but you've also got a trigger. So what might trigger this? This hedge line here might trigger something. These green fields will be cooler than the brown fields in front. They might trigger something. And that sensation of, is the air drawing you one way or another? That's a really useful trick as well. Sniff the air. Pig shit is a fantastic one. Pig shit is about the best marker of the lot, and you really do smell it. It's amazing. Often you go, oh Christ, look for a pig farm. They're fantastic. They work really well. So where to find your next climb when low? Again, some of you might recognize this from that video. But it is quite a good illustration, really, because this is a flight from Codden. I'm actually pointing back at Codden. I'm flying back into wind here because the territory downwind wasn't promising. So what you can see is this field here is lovely and brown. There's a pig farm. So I could literally smell the pig shit. So two good thermal sources, and even better, this cloud shadow has just drifted. Remember, this is upwind is where I'm pointing at the moment, so I'm pointing back the way I came. This cloud shadow has just drifted onto them. So what happens is the cloud shadow comes on, cool air undercuts the warm air on the field and lifts it up. So cloud shadows, the downwind end of a cloud shadow is a really good place to hunt. So the cloud is blowing onto this trigger, often releases it. So that's a good tip. Undulations, another big thing I look for. So little breaks in the landscape. Like we said, thermals are sticky. They release off undulations. So if a brownfield is rising to the top of a hill, you know, once that warm air gets there, it can't go back down the other side. It can really only go up. You know, so undulations and they're not easy to spot from the air. It's quite difficult to see. You can see big mountains, but undulations are difficult. You have to really look hard at the landscape. Move on. Yeah, try and connect source to the cloud, as we've said. Let me move forward. Right, the easy part. Once you're up there, this is Exeter on a flight from Westward Ho. So once you're up there, if you're at base and you're in a gaggle, it's easy. Your quid's in. You just follow the bloody gaggle, you know. But if you're at base and on your own, yeah, the trick is you look ahead. So you're looking at clouds ahead, as we've said. You're avoiding blue holes. Generally, on a day like this is a good illustration, actually. On a day like this, I wouldn't hesitate to climb right to cloud base. You can see lots of clouds all around here. None of them at all. None of those are threatening. You know, you can go right to base. And of course, if you don't go right to base, you haven't got as far on your next glide to find your next climb, have you? So you want to get right up high. It's always worth focusing on climbing. If I just went for a straight glide from here, I'd be down in no time. It's amazing how, you know, you just don't get very far. So you've constantly got to be looking for a climb and never be tempted by that thing of, oh, I'll just glide another 2K, because actually that is all you'll get. You know, look around and think, where is there possibly a climb? There might be a climb there. I'm going to glide 2K that direction and I might score. If I glide 2K into a blue hole, I'll be down.
And can I
yep.
just jump in? You know, when looking at a landscape like that below you, are you not bricking it that you're going to be on top of some industrial unit in a minute?
Good point. But one of the things I was going to say, you know, a useful thing to do is learn to estimate your glide. So from here, I had a reasonable tailwind. I probably had, I don't know, 15 kph tailwind. On a glide, I would probably get to somewhere around there. You know, and it's something you can't, you know, you can only learn it by practice, you know. But again, that practice at Woolacombe sometimes helps. You've flown out the front. How far can I glide back? You know, because remember, this is a downwind glide. So I've got a lot of territory. The other things I've got there, you know, if it was getting a bit sticky, if I was, you know, getting to this sort of an area in low, I've got fields to divert to. But yeah, I mean, you're right. If this was a much bigger town, I'd be a bit more wary, or for that matter, if I was on a line a bit further to the north here, you can see there's much more town, much fewer fields, isn't there? Can you see my pointer? But you only get it by practicing. And yeah, again, there are bomb outs here. If I really wasn't, yeah, if I was sinking fast, there's down here, down by my feet. But probably I'd probably reach here on a glide, you know, from there. But it is constantly something you've got to practice. Yeah. One of the other things that brings up is actually keeping your orientation, keeping what is downwind. It's very difficult to do. You know, when you first start flying, you've got this, you're doing these 360s, you're going round and round and round, and you get to the top of your first climb and you think, shit, which way's downwind? I mean, we've talked about doing it on your instrument, but if you haven't got an instrument, any thoughts? How you do it, Rob?
Cloud shadows?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, watch which way the clouds are blowing. Yeah, it may be slightly different, but it'll be broadly the same. Yeah, so the clouds are all going that way. That's downwind.
Smoke.
Look for ground signals.
Sorry?
Look for ground signals, wind farms, smoke.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, smoke, wind farms. One of the things I do, having identified what's downwind, so from cloud shadows, from my GPS, from ground sources, I lay myself a marker. So, you know, on here, I'd have looked at that and found something characteristic. Say this, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little canal there. You know, so that's my downwind heading, roughly. And I'm almost invariably going to be flying at a cone about, you know, maybe slightly one side or another to that. But it's a good way of just identifying it. After your first thermal, what I usually do is look back at the hill, because that's downwind of you, isn't it? So I look back at the hill and then do another 180, look downwind, find a characteristic field. So if I went back a slide or two, let's just show you, let's just, no, following one. Yeah, so yeah, in a landscape like this, there aren't many characteristic things, are there? And it's very easy to get disorientated. So I would probably, you may not be able to see it, there's a little farmhouse there, a white farmhouse, and I probably would have picked that out and said, right, that's my downwind. So if I get a couple of gentle turns and start getting disorientated, I found that distinctive shaped field. It might be, there might be a field, doesn't really show one, but often there's a field that's, I don't know, triangular or long and pointy or something. So just orientating what's downwind is really helpful. I mean, I think everybody's done it. You do a few gentle 360s, start flying off and realize you're flying 45 degrees off track. It's ever so easy to do, you know, and it's not the end of the world because you're still in the air, you know. So the easy part, yeah. Yeah, if you're at base on a moderately breezy day, all you got to do is circle and lift and you'll cover 20k in no time. You know, if it's not so breezy, you've got to fly cloud to cloud and all shades in between. You know, yeah, from 4,000 feet, you'll glide 10k, probably more, 12k. You know, if you've got a tailwind. So what now? Yeah, we just talked about that, haven't we? How to establish which way is downwind. When to leave lift? Short answer is on most days, not until you reach cloud base. And on windy days, I might not even leave lift at cloud base. I might just stay with the cloud and drift if the downwind territory isn't terribly promising. If there's a big blue hole ahead, you don't need to go into the blue hole, just stay with your lift, just drift gently with it. Sometimes put big ears on under the cloud so you're not getting too high. You're just drifting with that cloud, and that cloud is drifting at 20 kph. So if it's windy, let the drift do the work to start with. Take climbs to base. This is in the Brecon Beacons, so that's one of the Brecon Beacons way down below. Lovely. Again, we talked about that 45-degree rule. From here, you know, you can't tell what the cloud is like, can you? You've no idea, but I'll have sussed it out on the way up there. If you've got yeah, what else are we going to say? Yes. Yeah, if it's windy, you can drift with weak climbs. If it's not windy, you're going to have to move cloud to cloud. Follow a gaggle. If there is a gaggle, that's ideal. Downwind dash, just the same. No, it's a slightly different photo, but similar one. That's a good example of something I might fix as an object to keep me orientated downwind. This big whatever that is there, big factory. Pretty much invariably, your first flights are going to be a downwind dash. So yeah, don't be worried too much about flying, about fancy upwinds and tasks and stuff. But having said that, remember the main object at this stage is stay in the air. If you don't stay in the air, if you're down on the deck, you know, end of day. So occasionally, yeah, you do turn around and fly upwind. If I'd got here and this was all blue ahead of me, but behind me, I know I just left some nice lift, I'd go back to the nice lift and you can wait. You know, if you fly off into a blue hole, you're down in no time. You know, so staying in the air is more important than just sort of blindly batting off downwind. Once you land, it's all over. Yeah, this was another one where I just wondered if you could estimate how far you glide from there. Probably somewhere around my pointer here, you know, but it's a useful thing to keep doing while you're flying. Just keep practicing how far to glide. Anyone got any questions at the moment while I have a sip of beer?
Is there any way to sort of gauge how far you're going to go other than just sort of by eye? Like
yeah, a little bit. You can do as you're going. Each climb that I take, so each time I get to base, I would how could I put it? Yeah, you make an estimate of where you're going to get to. And have you seen this? Have you ever seen this thing where you have you've got your feet in front of you and you look, and is the horizon coming up or is it going down? Does that mean anything to you? Does that make sense? Yeah, so you can do that from way up high, you know. So here I might, you know, if this was going up in my vision, sorry, I'm pointing wrong. Sorry, if this building was going up in my vision, I'm probably not going to make it, am I? If it's going down in my vision, I'm going to make it. So it gives you a sort of an estimate of your glide angle as you're going along, you know, and you haven't got to do that all the way to the deck to just get an estimate of what your glide angle is, and you soon become familiar with it, you know. So I'd be pretty confident that from here, flying downwind, I'm easily going to clear that, you know, and even if there was a big town here, I'd be confident I was going to clear it, you know. So it's something you just learn by guesstimating it all the time, and it's good practice to guesstimate it. Yeah. Anyone else got any queries at the moment?
Yeah, and looking at that picture,
Yeah.
you've got those two really obvious nice clouds in front of you. You're going downwind, the sun is behind you. So of the two really pretty clouds, the left-hand one, is that forming from the buildings you just pointed out?
It probably is. It probably is, I would guess, yes. And that's the way I went. This was actually taken on a flight from the Peak District to Scarborough. The Scarborough is just down there. You can see the coast. So one of the things that's happening in this picture, which you can't see very well, but just beyond, there's a sea breeze front. So when we actually landed at Scarborough, we landed in a 20-mile-an-hour headwind. We've been flying downwind all day, suddenly hit the coast, 20-mile-an-hour headwind. But yeah, and I mean, you know, here, that cloud is nearer. If I was low, I might have diverted that way because it's nearer, but I'm plenty high enough to reach that cloud. And again, that's one of the things you sort of learn to guess, you know, how far away can a cloud be to reach it. And you only really learn by practice, you know, or by watching other pilots. If you're in a gaggle, somebody may have gone off ahead of you. That's the ideal scenario. They've gone off ahead. You've seen how much height they lost and they found the lift for you. It's great. Just go straight there. You know, it's brilliant. Yeah. In fact, it's one of the big advantages of flying a B. I've been flying a B glider for years, and I often fly with Enzo's, Xenos, you know, hot competition gliders, and you climb just as well as these buggers. You're not much slower flying downwind than they are. You're a little bit slower, but they get there first every time, and they find the lift. It's great. You know, you just pimp off them. You just fly to where to go. So that's ideal. What else have I got? Oh yeah, be wary of indecision. You know, this would be a good example. Yeah, I mean, the last thing to do here is think, oh, I'm going to that cloud. Oh no, I'm going to that cloud. Oh no, I'm going to that cloud. You know, it puts you on the deck in no time. Having said that, there is you know, sometimes you do have to change plan, but just be wary of that constant vacillation. You've got to sort of, yeah, think about your plan for a minute first before you go, and then follow it. Is the general rule. You know, if you keep changing your mind, think, oh God, it was better upwind, you know, you get nowhere. You just stay in all the sink. Heavy sink is an easy one to be fooled by. You fly into an area heavy sink, you think, shit, you know, this is terrible. I've got to get out of it, and you turn around and go back. All you're doing is going through the area of sink twice. So don't do that. You know, the heavy sink is almost certainly there because there's good lift ahead of you. You know, so you might think about putting speed bar on in the heavy sink, but generally I'd just fly straight through it. You know, the good guys would put speed bar on, but there's no need to. You know, low saves. Hey, that's a good picture, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, they're part and parcel of many a flight. They're great fun, but you do need to be confident they're safe. So if it's windy, be wary of low saves, you know, because you're going to get all that turbulence from down at ground level. Low is the dangerous part of a flight, not high. If it's been very strong thermals all day, be wary of low saves. Have you all seen that Greg Hamilton video where he gets eaten by a dusty?
Yeah.
It's a classic, and yeah, I'd have fallen into exactly the same trap. You've got this lovely thermal source, you're greedy, you want it, but actually it was a booming day, and it's quite likely you're going to get a dusty and turbulence there. So, you know, when you're getting that low, yeah, be slightly wary. You know, no reason why. I've had low saves from treetop height, and no reason why you shouldn't if the territory is okay to do that in. You know, but if you're going for a low save from treetop height and behind the treetops there's a town, you know, no, you can't do that because you can't rely on the low save. You don't want to be landing in the town. So low save is one thing in a nice open wheat field. It's another thing altogether just at the edge of a town or by a river or somewhere where you can't afford to go down or somewhere where there's likely to be turbulence, you know. So if it's windy, be wary. If it's really strong, be wary. Safety. There's Rich. Anyone know whose gliders he's got there?
Mine, hopefully.
It's Malcolm Patson's old glider that Chris Blanchard was flying on his first ever flight on it, and that is his line twists when he landed. Can you see that in the picture? It was like a fucking ball. There's nothing of it. He'd had a drama and reserve throw, and this was us sorting out the glider afterwards. took hours on the ground, no chance of sorting out in the air. But the message on that is Chris was flying a relatively hot glider for the first time in relatively strong conditions, and it went tits up. So fly a glider you're confident in. It's much more important than a hot glider, particularly at this stage in your early cross-country career. An A glider will get you 100k, as we said. A B certainly will. Fly in suitable conditions, especially the wind strength, as we've said. Windy equals turbulent. Keep that 45-degree rule in mind, but don't be obsessed with it. To fly cross country, really, you almost invariably fly to cloud base unless there's a reason not to. Be weather aware. If the forecast is that it's going to get windier and windier, you might want to quit while you're ahead. If the forecast is for thunderstorms, you might want to quit while you're ahead. So all of these things are sort of like prepared you, and reduce your chances of running into turbulence. So don't be turbulence is pretty rare. You don't get that many. Let me have a sip of beer. Anyone know where that one is? Should be familiar.
Willicombe. Well, not far from Brunton.
That was the day you outflew me, you bastard, Sam.
Fullabrook.
Yeah, it's in the middle of Fullabrook Wind Farm, and not a drop of turbulence for what it's worth. Landed beautifully. But yeah, landing out, don't be afraid of it. It really isn't an issue in most of the UK. From up high, as we've seen in those pictures earlier, there's 1,000 fields you can pick. Up high, you've got plenty of choice. Your choice narrows as you descend, obviously. So, by the time I'm up, I don't know, maybe 1,000 foot above the territory, I'm starting to look around and think, I'm heading that way. Those are my landing options. But I'm not really studying them at that height. I'm just keeping an eye on them. The lower you get, though, the more you'd be studying them, particularly if there's no obvious lift ahead of you. So make a few selections early, have a few areas in mind early. What are you looking for in a landing field? Any thoughts, Barry?
Hot women.
Not gorse.
I was going to say a beer garden, hot women. A beer garden.
Yeah, beer garden's useful.
Lack
What are we
of
looking
power
for?
lines, I think I'd be looking for.
I'd say what we're not looking for, what we don't want. We're looking for what we don't want: power lines,
Absolutely.
trees, fences, like barbed wire fences,
Livestock,
ditches, livestock.
Yep.
Boulders.
Yeah. I think that.
And
easy
boulders,
access out.
Yeah, definitely. And I sort of divide them in my head into two categories. There's things for safety, which is obviously the overriding bit, and there I think all the things you've mentioned. So power lines, potential rotor. Particularly if it's a windy day. A field that's behind a load of tall trees or a load of buildings, not a good idea. Tight fields, you want to pick a nice big one, particularly if it's windy. Places where dragging might be dangerous, so boulder fields or somewhere where it's uneven or immediately downwind, there's lots of horrible barbed wire and things. So first thought is safety things, and I would always, out of preference, pick a safe field rather than a convenience field. I think I dread the thought of like breaking my leg in a convenient field with a nice safe field beside it. You'd feel such a pillock, wouldn't you? So safety is number one. And then there's sort of political things or convenience things. There's things like not landing in a field with stock, preferably not with crop, preferably not freshly sprayed with cow shit, which you sometimes don't spot until too late. I have landed in a field with a llama, and llamas are fine, but horses are not popular. And yeah, look for your exit. That's a big tip, actually. It makes a big difference. It's amazing how from the air you're busy focused on your landing, you're concentrating on this, and you get down at ground level and you think, shit, where's the gate? Or which of those gates do I go to? So on your way down, just make a little mental note. It's easy to see from the air. Say, oh, that gate down the bottom field, turn left, turn right, and I'm on the road.
Yeah, I think finding the lane out of it as well is quite important.
Yes, definitely. And obviously there are things like, always being polite to farmers and grovel if you have to, etc., etc. But the big thing is safety. And I mean, in reality, you're entitled to land pretty much anywhere you like in the UK. You can class it as an emergency landing, and yeah, people get. It's very rare people get upset. Actually, I can only think of one person who's been upset with me for landing. The majority are delighted. So it's not an issue. Finding a safe landing field is rarely an issue. Before you land, though, any thoughts on what you're going to do? I think I've got it there, haven't I? Is that how you spell assessing?
It is how you spell assessing. Yeah.
God, amazing. He's got a lot of S's in, isn't it? Bloody hell. So yeah, assessing the wind direction. And when are you going to do that?
When you're not, when you're reasonably close to the ground, not super close, but you want to assess the wind direction down there, don't you? Not up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess to a certain extent, it's something you're doing all your flight, but yeah, in particular, as you get lower, you want to do it. And how are you going to do it?
Do a 360.
Yeah, absolutely. Do 360 and look at your instrument is one way, which way is fastest, which way is slowest. Look at your shadow is great. If your instrument fails, your shadow is a really good one. It's quite hard to judge without looking at your shadow, actually. But look at your shadow and you can see how fast it's going one direction, how slow the other. And I'll generally do that a couple of times on the way to a landing field. It'll depend a bit on how big the field is and where it is. But, I might do one at perhaps 500 feet and just see, yeah, it's quite strong. And then I might do another one at, 300 feet because it's going to dictate how you approach your field, isn't it? So, yeah, assessing the wind direction, definitely important. Assessing your wind direction on a flight is an interesting one. That's why I put this slide up. This was actually a day I'd flown from Belston on Dartmoor, and I've flown down. We'd flown southwesterly, and I'm now coming back along a sea breeze front. So I'm facing northeasterly, flying dead into wind northeasterly. Wind down on the ground is blowing southeasterly, completely different on the smoke there, and that's a sea breeze for you. Good classic sign of a sea breeze, but not really relevant to assessing the wind for landing, but relevant in flight. So we talked about that. Yeah, observation, 360, and watch your shadow, and use your GPS to assess your ground speed, and do it several times if you need to. And then expensive mistakes you will make after you've landed. Anyone got any thoughts on those? Everybody does it.
Not picking up your radio or your stereo or something.
Absolutely. After your first XC, you land, you go, yes, you get your Todger out and have a quick piss on it, you look at you celebrate, you get really pleased, you chuck everything on the ground, and then you bloody lose it, So yeah, it's definitely worth again having a system. I mean, this is landing at Sidmouth from Westward Ho. So just about, I didn't do Tim Pentreth and land on the beach because it looked a bit dodgy. So I picked the safe landing field, not the glory one, but I didn't break a leg either. So, but yeah, I mean, have a system. And what I do is I land, ball up my glider, because that's assigned to any other pilots that you're uninjured. So ball up your glider. You can lay it out again afterwards, but ball up your glider, move around a little bit. Get out your harness, take your jacket off, and put everything on your jacket. So, just be obsessional about it, because I guarantee you'll lose a bloody GPS, you'll lose a radio, you'll lose your phone, you'll lose your car keys, you'll lose something. So just be really particular about put it down on something in the same place every time, so that's a good tip, I reckon. Yeah, be obsessional about putting everything together, and then check and recheck you've got it all before you pack up. we're almost there. Next thing after landing, retrieve time and celebrate time, because it's great, fantastic. Nothing, no better feeling. Remember, as I say, in most places it's quite likely other pilots will be flying overhead, so that balling up your glider, I think, is quite important. Sort of a glider that's stationary on the ground and a pilot that's stationary on the ground, makes pilots at high think, shit, what's happened there? So it's definitely worth moving around. But having done that, having packed up, well, in fact, before I pack up, get busy on your retrieve logistics, because they can take a long time. So I'll do things like look on that XCRT Aero that we were talking about, Tim Pentreath's website, see who's around. If there's another pilot landed 2 kilometers away, I'm on the phone to him straight away, saying, oh, have you got anything organized for retrieves? And you say, yeah, my wife's coming to pick me up. Say, oh, can I come too? So get your retrieve sort of logistics in early. The earlier you're in, the more chance you've got of it being successful. So I'll have a quick scan, see if there's anyone nearby. I'll report in on Telegram or your WhatsApp group to your buddies that you've landed safe. You're looking for a retrieve. This is where I am. I'll send a, I presume you all know how to send a location.
On Telegram?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's but I'm the wrong man to ask, really. There's a little paperclip, and when you press on it, it comes up with a lot of options. One of which is location. I think that's right, but we practice it. Have a look.
Okay.
And there's a way of sending that location to this XCRT Aero. And Tim's video explains it much better than I can, but it's just really, really valuable. So get your WhatsApp message off to your mates early. Get that pin in early saying where you are, and with that pin put roughly your plan. Say, I'm hoping for a lift back to Codden, or I'm planning to get the bus from Meath to Codden, or something like that, so everybody knows what you're thinking. Then you can pack up your glider, walk to the nearest road, preferably a pub. Somewhere where you can celebrate is nice, but much more important is somewhere where there's phone reception. So if you're in the middle of mid Devon, don't be suckered into walking from somewhere with no phone reception, somewhere with phone reception to somewhere with no phone reception, because your chances of a retrieve go right down as soon as you do that. Your reception is king, particularly if someone's come to look for you. They're driving. For them to cover an extra mile is nothing. For you to cover an extra mile and lose reception is a nightmare. They can't find you anymore. So you can use the live location on WhatsApp. That's quite good. But have a schema in mind, and that's one of the things about getting your own group together, is you develop your own schema for getting back. Who's likely to be picking up who's still back at the hill, who hasn't got far, who's going to be able to fetch a car and pick up someone. So get all those things early, because you've probably got plenty of time to wait. You haven't got to be dashing straight off to the pub. What else have I got there? I think that's pretty much it. Oh, debrief. Yeah, does anyone debriefed any flights of theirs? Apart from Barry on his video, which was good.
What, like debrief yourself sort of thing?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, both, to be honest. I mean, you can debrief yourself, and you can debrief with others, and you can do it with technology, and you can do it without. I mean, one of the things to do is certainly to look back on your flight, whether electronically or simply from memory, and think, why did I land? Where did it go wrong? Because you land when it's gone wrong. You don't, when it's all going right, you fly on forever, so you land when it's gone wrong. And it's often several steps back. It's often things like, I didn't take that climb all the way to cloud base, and it was that climb, 20K ago, or I dillied and dallied. I went left, I went right. I couldn't make my mind up between these clouds, so yeah, it's definitely worth a good debrief, but don't beat yourself up about it. It's easy to sort of think, oh, failure. I only got 20K. You need to switch it the other way around. Say, I got 20K. So you got to celebrate what you achieved, not what you. It's very easy to look and think, oh, Richard flew 100. I only flew 50. Shit. So yeah, look back on it.
Can I just ask, and
Yeah.
the yellow track here, where you look like you ended up nearly in Swanage. How did you get back?
That one is Richard's track. That's Richard's
Oh,
track.
the Richard.
But yeah, it was a slide I had for flights from Woolacombe, stranger. There's another track. It's not. I had another one the same day I landed about here.
How did you get back from there then?
Rich got a taxi to meet me. I got a lift to a town with a railway station. Rich got a taxi to meet me, and we got a train to Exeter. Then we got a train from Exeter back to Barnstable.
Right. Okay. Blimey.
So, long flights often involve, getting back at bloody, 10 o'clock at night, but your first flights almost certainly won't. Your first flight's 20K, I mean, if push comes to shove, it's bloody taxiable, isn't it? 20K, particularly. But yeah, thinking about, as you get on in your career, thinking about retrieve logistics becomes more and more part of your day. And I guess, it's all part of this getting rid of as many barriers as you can before the day. So that's why the first half of the talk, in some ways, a little bit dry, isn't it? But it's all that preparation. The more bits of the jigsaw you get in place before the day, before takeoff, then the freer your mind is for concentrating on the flying, because it takes a lot of focus cross-country flying. And if you're scratching your head thinking, oh God, how am I going to get a retrieve, or little things like that, they put you on the deck, so everything you can do to get stuff ready before you take off is helpful.
I've been exhausted after just really short ones.
Yeah, it is hard work, it makes for a long old day, but yeah, it all becomes very familiar when you've done it. But all that logistics beforehand, when you first start, it's not familiar, is it? To make sure you're in a Telegram group, make sure you know how XRT Aero works, to know how to put a pin on Telegram, to know how to read a RAS forecast, etc., etc. They're things you can do now. The other big tip that I forgot to give you actually on airspace, next time you're driving through Bristol, or preferably your other half is driving through Bristol, take your instrument with you, and you sit in the passenger seat, pretend you're flying. It's a great way to learn to interpret the airspace on your instrument, because you go through about 6 different airspace zones, and as you're approaching it, shit, what does this mean? And can you extract the information from your instrument? Because if you can't, you need to learn to. Maybe not in North Devon, less so than most. I mean, we've really only got Dartmoor. You can see on here the danger areas, and Yeovilton. Sorry, that's Yeovilton. That's place where Stuart flies his plane from. I've forgotten his little airfield.
Well,
that's and that's Exeter.
Dunk as well.
Dunk as well. That's it. Yeah. So around here we're spoiled, but if you imagine flying up around Salisbury or around here, around Bristol, very different. And a great way of practicing, you say, is turn whatever your navigation instrument is on whilst somebody's driving you through an area with a load of airspace, and see if you can interpret what it means. Because as you drive through, as you approach Bristol, there's an area where it's 4,000 foot to 6,000 foot is airspace or something. Then it steps down and it's 3,000 foot to 4,000 foot, and then it's ground to 3,000 foot or whatever it is. I can't remember the details, but you can work through it, really work through it with your instrument. I
was going to say, Avery is really good for looking back over your flights, isn't it? Everyone's not heard of that.
It is indeed. Steve, you got any words of wisdom to add, mate? It's a bit of a marathon, that, isn't it? Christ, it takes a long time, this cross-country flying.
Not really. I think Sam sort of, for me, summed it up a little bit in saying that it is exhausting, mentally more than the physical side of it. The times that I've landed, even when I've sort of only done 20 or 30K, I'm knackered, and I'm thinking, crumbs, how did that happen? And it is, you are mentally drained, sort of, with all of the information that you're trying to ingest and you're trying to sort of use to keep the flight going. Combine that with a little bit of travel sickness, and it makes for an interesting day.
Yeah, but it's all the more reason for like getting as much of this shit out of the way beforehand as you possibly can. Really, when you arrive on the hill, you want to be doing nothing but focusing on getting your kit ready, finding that climb. That's not the time to be hassled about airspace, about retrieves, about are you on the right Telegram group, about how do I work my instrument, and getting that stuff out the way and done and dusted makes a huge difference. And the exhaustion, I mean, it remains tiring, but it gets less tiring. The more familiar it becomes, like all these things. Remember your first driving lesson. God, I've got to change gear. Oh, and I've got to steer. Oh, what are these pedals? There's a million things to do at once, isn't there? But now, you can eat your sandwiches, turn the radio on, change stations, use your phone, do all sorts while driving, can't you? Don't say use your phone. Shouldn't say that, should I? I don't know. Rob, anything you want to ask about? Any queries, or does it make sense?
I think I found it really helpful. There's a lot to take in, but there's a lot to learn. So, from a rank amateur's point of view, I think it's been really rewarding. It's been, it's a really good thing to have done. So, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ant.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably my two biggest things would be preparation and just bloody do it. Set yourself up to do it. Say, this is looking like a good day. I'm going to try. If you don't have that, I'm going to try. You never do it. And like all these things, the first one is the difficult one. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's easy. So prepare ahead as much as possible. Give yourself time. Don't let the organisational issues get in the way, because they do. Stack as many of the odds in your favour as you can, and fly safe. There's a couple of, on the slides, there's a load of references here for various things, but they'll be on the video. We don't need to look at those now. The gist of what I'm saying actually was, it's based on an article I wrote for Skywings a couple of years back. So there is a link to that as well, if you want like a very much shortened written version, but it condenses the same sorts of things in there. That Tim Pentreath video, well worth a look at. That's a really important one for the retrieves. Maybe not so much for your first couple of flights, because they probably won't be that far, and you're probably not going to be involved with 100 other pilots. But being prepared to travel, that's a really, hopefully we can all car share this year and be able to do that, but we'll see. For what it's worth, locally, Woolacombe, I think, is, it's a bloody difficult site to get away from. I mean, it's safe, but it's difficult. It's much harder than most sites. Dartmoor is our nearest easy area. Belston is great. Corn's pretty good. Soughton's pretty good. Kingtor's pretty good.
Why do you say Woolacombe's difficult to get away from?
Thermals are very hard to centre at Woolacombe, and they're very weak.
Right.
Climbs are weak. Cloud base is low. Often if you're flying in further inland, by the time you've at the top of your first climb, you're at $4,000. At Woolacombe, you're rarely more than $2,000. And you're down pretty quickly from $2,000 if you get it wrong. But at $4,000, you've got a little bit more to spare.
Right.
So Woolacombe is safe, and it's a great place for trying it. And even if you only go 3 fields, you've landed out, haven't you? And it's a whole different experience. So it's worth doing that. It hasn't got to be long. If you fly 5K from Woolly, you've gone cross country. You've committed and you've learned a lot.
Definitely steps over a bit of a mental barrier once you do your first couple of leaving the hills. I think it definitely made a big difference to me.
I mean, you had a big mental barrier when we went to Hambledon, didn't you, Sam? Because we're like you got to Cloud Base, which was way high, 5,000 foot, and like Rich buggered off, and you were all on your own, and without a game plan,
Got myself and went straight back to the hill. Let's get back down.
So having a vague game plan is definitely helpful.
But it is just having that much to just shows how much it is to process mentally. It's a very different situation being at Cloud Base for the first time when you're not on the hill and you're sort of disorientated or whatever. It's quite daunting.
Yeah.
But sort of more reiterates why you go through all the precursor steps, get everything ready. Be ready for it.
Be ready for it. Well, thanks, Ant.
You're welcome. Yeah. God, it took a long time, that, didn't it? Bloody hell. I rabbit on, don't I?
It's all great. It's great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah, good.
Shall I? Am I okay to stop the recording?
Yes, I reckon so. Yeah.
Yeah. That's anyone else going to add? Lovely.
Yeah.
Right.